Wow. Everyone finally gets it now. And I do mean everyone. Older generations say we all struggled in our 20s. No, you didn't. You didn't pay $2,200 for rent and $7 for eggs. You didn't graduate into $50,000 of debt and zero job security. Gen Z isn't dramatic. They're drowning. This post got over 10,000 upvotes. Not views, upvotes. Boomers, I fed a family of 4 on $50 per week. Gen Z, $50 barely covers lunch. This isn't inflation. This is engineered poverty. This one got over 5,500 upvotes. But to be fair, these posts were found on the Gen Z subreddit, which is of course probably going to be biased. But then I came across this video of Tucker Carlson, of all people. Not exactly a young woke liberal who's just been indoctrinated by Marxists or whatever they like to insult Gen Z with these days. Here's what he had to say about the baby boomers.
They remembered when Kennedy was shot. It was the day the music died. Everything they said was like the Don McLean tune. It didn't make sense. It was just a series of evocative cliches strung together to create a feeling. They were idiots, but above all, they were about themselves. I hated them then. I hate them now. In 4th grade, I remember saying to a buddy of mine, I hate these people. Our math teacher just told us, I was at Woodstock. I was like, how many fucking people were at Woodstock? Like, everyone in America was at Woodstock? I thought it was 300,000 people. They made it sound like it was... They're the worst. They're the ones who lecture us about the civil rights movement for 40 years as the actual supposed beneficiaries of the civil rights movement, black people, declined. They didn't care. They were only about feeling good about themselves. The only good thing they produced was like the music of 1972. Other than that, horrible people. Horrible. Sorry.
Finally, literally everybody gets it. Even in this polarizing time where we are more politically divided than ever, both the right and the left have found one piece of common ground that we can all agree on. Generally speaking, boomers are an absolutely horrible, disgusting, repulsive generation. It doesn't mean every one of them is a bad person individually. I mean, we've all met the occasional boomer who was a decent person individually speaking, sure. But let's be very clear. They are the exception and not the rule. But why exactly are they like this? I mean, it's important to note that to some degree, everyone is just going to be a product of their environment. Gen Z realized from an early age how bullshit the system is because, well, that's pretty much all they've known and experienced their whole lives. My generation, the millennials, were hopelessly and delusionally optimistic about the future because we still remember the good times of the 90s and the early 2000s. So we all know boomers are the absolute worst, most selfish and narcissistic generation ever. But why exactly are they like this? What were the historical factors they grew up with that made them that way? A great Gen Z YouTuber a lot of you probably know by the name of What If Altist made a great historical breakdown video about this. It's titled How the Baby Boomers Ruined Society. It's gotten over 1.5 million views and, to be honest, could use 10 million more. He made a lot of fantastic and interesting points on how the historical context boomers grew up in made them the absolute monsters that they are today. Perhaps the most important defining historical event that made boomers the way they are now is World War II, the absolute worst conflict in human history. Now, boomers themselves never experienced the war as they were the first generation to be born after its conclusion. But the butterfly effect, the after effects of the World War, rippled throughout society for decades and set the stage for the inception of the worst generation ever. The world was in total collapse and ruin after the conclusion of World War II. The scars of its devastation were seen and felt literally everywhere. It was almost as if the entire world had been completely destroyed and had to be rebuilt again from ground zero. Enter the first generation to be born into these circumstances. Essentially, all of civilization was being rebuilt after the war. And so baby boomers who were born into this historical context grew up under the illusion that the world began with them. This explains why they're just so selfish, arrogant, out of touch, and narcissistic. To some level, people are just a product of their environment. This doesn't excuse their behavior, but it does somewhat explain it. What if Altists did a fantastic job connecting the dots here? It's very easy to see why someone who grows up in a time where it feels like the world began with you would end up becoming extremely self-centered and narcissistic. This, by the way, is not just speculation either. There's a lot of hard data and evidence that there are way more sociopaths and narcissists per capita in the boomer generation than any other one. Bruce Cannon Gibney exposes this more in depth in his book titled A Generation of Sociopaths: How the Baby Boomers Betrayed America. Now, people love to throw out the whole Gen Z doesn't even know what gender they are as a cheap shot insult towards Gen Z, but boomers literally don't even know what year it is. They're stuck in some weird psychological time freeze where they think it's still 1960 and rent is still $50 per month. They're the true brain rot generation. Their brain rot is so severe that they literally don't know how to perform basic math functions. I'm not talking about advanced or even intermediate mathematics like algebra or geometry. I'm talking about how they don't even know how to perform basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. When you mention how unbelievably expensive everything has gotten today, boomers will gaslight you by saying wages were lower back in their day too, therefore it evens out. But this is just totally delusional brain rot logic. You have to actually break down how wages compare to overall living expenses back then to get the whole picture. Also, wages only matter if you even have income in the first place, which a third of Gen Z doesn't even have because the boomers turned the economy into such dog shit for future generations, which renders the entire argument about wages being higher totally useless for a third of Gen Z anyways. And as for the remainder of Gen Z that actually does have some semblance of an income, well, this guy right here explains it perfectly.
If you look back to 1980, the rent was $243. Minimum wage was $3.10, meaning your monthly gross was $496. So to rent this apartment, it would be 48.9% of your gross income back in 1980. But let's fast forward to 2024. The average rent is $17.47. The federal minimum wage is $7.25, giving you $11.60. You can't even get an apartment with the federal minimum wage. But let's be generous and double the federal minimum wage because people at Walmart and fast food joints are making $14.50 to $15. So $14.50 would bring you to $23.20, and it would be 75% of your gross income, making double the federal minimum wage in 2024. But let's take it even a step further. ZipRecruiter said that starting pay for college graduates is $24 an hour. So that would be $38.40 a month. Someone with a bachelor's degree could afford this one-bedroom apartment, but it would be 45.4% of their gross income. A college graduate is spending the same amount of their income on rent as the minimum wage worker in 1980 did.
And on top of all that, one additional factor that he probably just didn't have time to cover in the context of a YouTube short is that even most college graduates can't get jobs anymore. Or even if they do, it's not a job that required a degree in the first place. And they're being saddled with insane amounts of student loan debt, which is cutting into their monthly budget even more. This boomer brain rot logic of, but wages were lower back then too, without factoring how much lower they were relative to living costs, is like everything else, just pure dumb boomer delusion. Hey guys, so I'm on a mission and I need your help. You see, I've made it the purpose of this channel to defend Gen Z from all these nasty delusional Gen Z haters, and I've just realized we're starting to get close to taking down the most despicable one yet, the angry guy. This guy is not just another delusional old fart calling Gen Z lazy. He's literally had videos where he openly celebrates Gen Z suffering and even dying. He's just straight up a terrible, terrible human being. Now, thankfully, his channel is rapidly dying and we are rapidly gaining ground on him as we speak. So, if you're new here and enjoying this content, definitely consider subscribing and helping us take down the biggest Gen Z hater out there. The current goal is to surpass him in subscribers by the end of summer. With your help, we can absolutely do this. And Bruce Cannon Gibney's book further exposes this fact regarding the issue of college, specifically college tuition. Boomers are expert gaslighters. We all know and have experienced this over and over by now. One reason they're overwhelmingly against student loan forgiveness is because they'll often tell you, and I'm sure you've heard this by now, college was always expensive, even back in my day. Again, just another delusional boomer brain rot take. If you actually look at the actual hard data and evidence, you'll see that, per usual, it pretty much says the exact opposite. According to official sources, in the mid-1960s, college tuition was only $243 annually, not per semester, per year. But wages were lower back then too. Okay, so let's adjust this for inflation. $243 from 1965 is equivalent to $2,492 and some change in today's money. Now, anyone who's gone to college recently will know that that's exponentially cheaper than tuition prices today, even after adjusting for inflation. The average college tuition today is anywhere between 5 to 10 times that amount, depending on in-state versus out-of-state, and this is the reason we can't take any of their opinions seriously, and why it feels so impossible to have any real conversation with them. In order to have a productive conversation with a grown adult about real-world issues, there has to be a baseline common sense level of basic real world concepts such as how math and numbers work. I don't have the time or energy to engage in a long form conversation with you if I have to explain to you that 1 + 1 = 2, or that inflation does actually exist and is a very real economic factor. And when you tell me that wages were lower back then too, without factoring exactly how much lower they were relative to living costs and inflation, you're basically telling me you don't understand the basic math concept that 50 divided by 2 is still way less than 2,000 divided by 10, 12, 15, or even 20. And yeah, sorry, but I don't have the time to explain to you how basic multiplication and division works if you somehow never learned that in grade school. And the absolute scariest part is that these brain rot old farts who don't know how to do basic multiplication and division are for the most part in charge of running the country and making all the decisions impacting our futures right now as we speak. Is it any wonder why this country has gone to such shit since they took over and started running things? Let's wrap up this video by exposing the sheer brain rot of one of my favorite boomers we've covered before right here on this channel, Dr. Phil. By the way, we have to use the term doctor in very, very loose terms here. A funny story we'll probably get into another one of these days. Now, Dr. Phil recently made a video where he covered the crippling cost of living crisis in America right now, and he actually seemed like he was finally coming around here. I mean, he was fairly sympathetic to his guests who were telling him their heartbreaking stories of just how much pain, economic pain, inflation had inflicted on them and their families in the modern day and age. And as I was watching this, at first I thought, maybe he's starting to slowly step out of his boomer brain rot finally. And then he made this video, why so many adults live at home. Gee, I wonder why. I mean, is this literally a rhetorical question at this point? And when I watched that video, it was literally the biggest contradiction ever to the previous video I mentioned. On one hand, he's acknowledging that inflation does in fact exist. And by the way, how pathetic is this? I mean, how low has the bar gotten that we actually credit boomers for understanding the basic economic concept of inflation at this point? Anyways, but in the next video, he's totally dismissing inflation as some sort of non-existent fairy tale concept that, I don't know, he thinks Gen Z is just using it as an excuse to not move out, apparently. As if inflation magically decides to affect everyone else besides Gen Z, right? In the video, he actually does acknowledge that rent prices have gone up significantly. But, ladies and gentlemen, you gotta listen to this. He presents a very genius solution. Just get a roommate.
Phil, so they're not making enough to live on their own. Well, get a roommate.
This is what I mean by boomer brain rot is such insanity that it's a waste of time even bothering to have a conversation with them. I'm at a point where I'd have to explain to Dr. Phil the basic math concept that a really, really big number divided by 2 is still a really big number. Even if you were to divide the average rent in half, it's still around $1,000 per month, which is significantly more than even I was paying as a millennial 10 years ago. And it's still over twice as much as baby boomers were paying for rent. And yes, even after accounting for wage differences. So yeah, as you can see, boomers are the true brain rot generation here. Math, history, facts, and hard evidence I'll prove it, and don't let them gaslight you into thinking anything otherwise. On top of being a totally delusional brain rot generation, they're also by far and away the biggest lazy parasitic generation ever. They'll shame you for being lazy and not working, but they themselves do nothing but sit around on their own butts collecting welfare in their own form of social security, which, by the way, is far and away the biggest financial burden to society right now. We expose this more in this video right here. Check it out. I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.